Have you ever encountered the idea that science explains everything? Do you think that that is true, and how does it affect both science and faith? Hi, I'm Kirk, and I'm a scientist and a philosopher and a person who spends a lot of time thinking about the why questions in life. So if you're interested in discussions pertaining to God, science, and life, then please subscribe to my channel here, where I'll be posting on a regular basis. You can also subscribe to my social media accounts, and the links are below. Prior to the time of Socrates, the ancient Greeks believed that things like lightning, earthquakes, and volcanic eruptions were caused by the gods. Over the centuries, however, we discovered that these things occur naturally without any need for the Greek gods. Sometime in the last century or so, many people began to believe that science will ultimately explain literally everything, and thus was born something we can call scientism. Scientism can be described as the belief that literally everything can be explained by science. A good question for us to think about might have two parts. The first part of this question is, how has scientism affected modern science? The second part of the question is how it has affected faith. A few years ago, I sat in the office of a biology professor who is a self-described atheist, but at the same time deplored the creative storytelling that was rampant in evolutionary biology in an effort to come up with an explanation for the diversity of life on Earth. Because modern science has embraced scientism, Darwinism is the only game in town, no matter the price in scientific integrity or reliance on creative storytelling. Even staunch Darwinists such as Jerry Fodor and Massimo Piatelli-Palmarini have pointed out the profound lack of critical thinking in discussions of evolutionary scenarios. In some earlier videos in this series, we saw how modern science has often lost the distinction between good science and creative storytelling or science fiction. So let's think about how scientism has affected faith. Have you considered how Christianity often embraces scientism without even being aware of it? I have frequently observed Christians trying to provide a natural explanation for a miracle in the Bible in an attempt to make the miracle more credible. For example, I listened to a Christian explain how if the Israelites fleeing Egypt crossed the Sea of Reeds at a very shallow place, and the wind had driven the water back, then that would explain what is often described as the parting of the Red Sea. The underlying assumption was, without even realizing it, that if science can verify how some supposed miracle happened in the Bible, then we can have more confidence that the Bible can be trusted. Thus, by making science the standard for credibility, they have unwittingly fallen prey to scientism. Of course, there's nothing wrong at all with investigating something that appears to be a miracle to see if it has a natural explanation. Where the line is crossed is when a Christian attaches more credibility to an event in the Bible if we can come up with a scientific explanation for it. So let us think about this for a moment from a Christian perspective. Here's a very interesting question. If miracles actually occur in this world, such as those described in the Bible, what would you predict the result would be of a scientific investigation? Have you considered the idea that if a miracle has actually occurred, then we should predict that the scientific consensus will show that it could not possibly have happened the way described in the Bible? So this raises a parallel question. Why would you expect that a scientific explanation would be compatible with an event if a divine interaction is stated quite clearly in the text? Have you thought about the huge implications? For example, although Christians propose a variety of interpretations for Genesis chapter 1, describing the creation of the universe and of the full diversity of life, one thing that seems reasonably clear is that God was involved in the creation of the universe and life. Why should we be astonished, therefore, if science will never find a testable and repeatable process for the creation of the universe and life? In fact, if there was a divine miracle, we would predict that the clear consensus of science would say that the events as described could not possibly have occurred. Scientism, therefore, puts the person of faith in a bit of a dilemma. Perhaps it would be helpful at this point to take a look at a smaller miracle mentioned in the Bible, when Christ turned water into wine. At a wedding in a village called Cana, they ran out of wine. Mary, the mother of Jesus, brought this to his attention, clearly implying that she would like him to do something about it. Somewhat reluctantly, he proceeded to ask that a number of large water jugs be filled with water and then sampled. Miraculously, they were filled with not just new wine, but wine that was described as very good. So let's think about a scientific explanation for a moment. First, wine that is very good requires aging. During an extended period of time, a number of chemical processes slowly take place that result in a fine wine about a year later. So if you were to submit a sample of that wine to a number of labs, the unanimous, clear consensus among all scientists and experts in the field would be that the wine was at least a year or so old, and they would be able to show exactly why that has to be the case. Anyone who suggested that the wine was only a few seconds old would be regarded as just plain silly. Second, wine requires carbon atoms, and there are none in water. If you want to produce carbon from water, nuclear fission is required to break down the oxygen atoms in the water, releasing an enormous amount of energy. Essentially, a nuclear fission bomb would have gone off in each of the water jugs, and the wedding would have ended in a gigantic fireball and mushroom cloud that would have been talked about for centuries as people looked at the glass crater that was once the town of Cana of Galilee. My point is this: if miracles have actually occurred in history, then we should predict that the clear consensus of science surrounding the consequences of the miracle will not at all match what happened. So it is fine and even good for Christians who are scientists to investigate a potential miracle to see if it's actually a miracle. But if it turns out to be a miracle, a scientific explanation may result in some absurd or wildly fantastic scenarios, as we often witness in the origin of the universe theories or origin of life scenarios. We already know that logic requires a supernatural origin for nature, as I've shown in a previous video. With that in mind, scientism appears to be a mistake. There are some things that cannot logically be explained by science. If the universe has a supernatural origin, then we should not be surprised if, from time to time, events occur for which fabricating a creative scientific-sounding narrative will actually be a mistake. Knowledge is an interconnected latticework of information and understanding, each facet of which influences and sheds light on other aspects. So, this leaves us with a bit of a conundrum. If science cannot explain everything, and if a scientific explanation for a miraculous event might be badly wrong, then what are the implications? Well, I hope you enjoyed the video, or at least found it thought-provoking. And if you did, please share it, or you can leave a comment in the section below. And also, don't forget to hit the like button.